Hello. So we continue with our thread on feminist theorizing. We are going to be speaking about feminist standpoint theories today, and I call it theories because, as you will see, it's a collection of several different scholars speaking about questions of how knowledge is constructed, who gets to make claims to knowledge, and what kinds of knowledges can be produced depending on where you're located socially, geographically, and historically. So there are three things largely that one could say constitute feminist standpoint theories. One is the claim that knowledge is socially situated. Second, it is that marginalized people are more aware and therefore can perhaps come to a better understanding of how the world is structured. Aspects that might be obscured from the view of those in dominant positions are visible to marginalized groups. And the third claim is that therefore research should begin with the experiences of those that are marginalized. So these are broadly the three claims. You will see in today's lecture, there are different aspects of it that come forth in the writings of different scholars. So let's begin. In order to kind of give an example, I think, and to help you understand this concept in a slightly more easier way, let's take this example given by Terry Elliott. And there are two people in this example. There is person A and person X. Person A approaches a building and enters it without even thinking or just kind of taking for granted that this is the entrance to the building. It looks like an entrance. It must be the entrance to the building, and walks right in. Person X also approaches the same building, and person X is on a wheelchair and then sees the steps that are leading up to the door, and immediately what was perceived as a way forward, as an entrance by person A, is looked at as a barrier, is perceived as a barrier by person X. I think this point really gets across the idea that depending on one's social location, one perceives and experiences the world quite differently, and therefore will have very different knowledge claims, very different questions that concern them depending on where they are situated. I have here a timeline of some of the multiple strands of standpoint theory. Standpoint theory, like many other feminist theories, in fact, is quite contested and still quite debated. And yet, people continue to, go back to it, develop it further, and make it more nuanced. And every new group that comes up which doesn't see itself as represented enough in existing theories comes and makes a claim to their own standpoint in the knowledge production canon. That said, the scholars here largely represent those coming out of second wave feminism, and most of them also very much embedded in the politics of their time, in the women's movement, in second wave feminist struggles, and in questioning what constitutes knowledge and how claims to knowledge are made. So I will not go through this list right now, but as you can see, this is 1970s and 1980s that we're talking about. Some of these scholars are sociologists of knowledge, others are philosophers of science, and others are philosophers that are largely looking at questions of epistemology, which, like I said, is basically about what constitutes knowledge, what are the right kind of questions to ask, what questions do we want to ask based on where we are located. We begin with Dorothy Smith. She was in fact one of the first to start writing about women's standpoint. So she is not yet using the term feminist standpoint, but she is very clearly articulating that the world is structured according to the standpoint of men, and specifically men in positions of power. She says sociology has been written from the standpoint of men in the ruling apparatus. Therefore, in order for sociological research to get to the right kind of questions, to produce a knowledge that also encompasses women's world, we need to begin from the everyday world. So in fact, one of her texts is titled The Everyday World is the Problematic. What she's trying to argue here, not so much in terms of theory, but she is asking for a standpoint where the methodological starting point is that of investigating social relations, looking at women's roles, positions, things that are usually taken for granted. But she also wants to insist that when we start looking at women's experiences or those of other marginalized groups, we are not here looking at just a woman's problem, or we are not investigating a bias in the way men have conducted this research, but that this is a structural problem in the way knowledge is produced and in the way knowledge is legitimized. She also asks for what she calls as institutional ethnography. So research that looks up, usually, like in the social sciences, a large part of the research is looking at from the top, to the bottom. But she says we need to look at those in power. We need to look at the kind of institutions that shape texts and norms and ideas that govern us. She calls this subject that she wants to investigate as relations of ruling. And I'll read out how she defines relations of ruling. She writes, relations of ruling are those forms of consciousness and organization that objectify, regulate, and coordinate our activities across multiple sites through textually mediated practices. So what are textually mediated practices? So she's here talking about the law, she's here talking about policies, she's here talking about norms, books, all of that constitutes the discourse through which we make sense of our world. So those are the ones that need to be studied and investigated in order to understand everyday social relations, and through that sociology needs to understand life worlds of not just those that are marginalized, but also those in dominant positions. Then we come to the work of Nancy Hartsock. She is in fact first kind of coining the term feminist standpoint. Nancy Hartsock's work derives very strongly from a Marxist tradition. She goes back to the Hegelian dialectic. We spoke about the Hegelian dialectic, the master-slave dialectic, and how the slave, because of the marginalized position that the slave is in, because of the mutual recognition through which the slave knows themselves, and because of the labor that they do in order to then also have the possibility of changing the world, the labor is better equipped and in a better position to understand the particular social relation between the master and the slave. So going back to that, she also draws on further Marxist theory in several different ways. One, because then the slave is in a better position to know, and that what one can know is shaped by one's material condition. Going back to Marxist theory, she looks at the idea of the standpoint of the proletariat, and in this case is arguing about the standpoint of women. It's also important to mention that here she is not just looking at women as a biological category, but that such a standpoint, the feminist standpoint, has to be developed through a certain consciousness that comes about through political struggle, right? So a very consciously assumed position of a woman and of a feminist standpoint is what gives one the insight that she is talking about. Standpoint, she writes, is an achieved collective identity or consciousness. Also one of the scholars who brings in social reproduction into the whole Marxist notion of capitalist work and labor. She says that because of that labor, women are in a better position in order to understand and make claims to knowledge. So let's read out a passage from her text, The Feminist Standpoint. Marx's understanding of the standpoint of the proletariat is grounded in the experience of wage labor. Feminist theory requires a comparable grounding, but one rooted in women's activities and experiences, especially those related to reproduction and the maintenance of life. Those who are oppressed in a system of domination must understand both their own lives and the lives of those who dominate them. While the reverse is not true, this is a very Hegelian idea. This asymmetry creates the possibility of a more complete understanding of social relations. Like the proletarian standpoint, a feminist standpoint does not arise automatically from experience. It is developed through collective struggle that makes visible the relations of domination shaping that experience. So with her, we get to the term feminist standpoint theory. Then several other scholars, in fact, one of Sandra Harding's reflective texts on standpoint theory draws a parallel between 2 or 3 year olds playing in the sand and doing parallel play, like, then they're kind of aware of the other, but not quite engaged with the other. So each one of them is making their own sand castles, but working and playing alongside. So several of these scholars are kind of doing that parallel play where they are embedded in the women's movement and yet separately working on some of these concepts, then come together to constitute what we now know as feminist standpoint theory. So another one of them, Hilary Rose, is also writing in 1983, as was Nancy Hartsock. She writes about a critique of how knowledge is produced within the natural sciences. And here she talks about the hand, brain and heart working in different directions and not recognizing the other. Here again, I have a few passages from her text which I think give us a very clear understanding of what she is trying to argue for. She writes, "The dominant ideology of science separates hand, brain and heart. Manual work is separated from mental work, and both are separated from feeling and responsibility." And much of this is also gendered, right? The men are seen as doing some of the intellectual labor of science, whereas women at that time were often hired as working hands in the laboratory or as receptionists and similar care work kind of professions. She says this division is not accidental. It is deeply embedded in the social relations of science. A feminist epistemology does not reject rationality of science. She is in fact questioning the rationality of science if it is making claims to universality, but is only presenting the perspective of one part of the human population. She says rather it seeks to reunite thinking, doing and feeling, and to insist that responsibility and care are integral to the production of knowledge. A very novel way of looking at the doing of science at that time, and I would argue even today. Notions of care and responsibility don't quite often find a place in the narrative of doing science. It is mostly rigor and rationality and replicability and so on, right? What are the terms that get to define what is science? She writes, "Scientific knowledge is produced through labor organized in particular social relations," and we know that they are gendered social relations. "But to understand science, we must examine who does the work, under what conditions, and in whose interests." So she's also going back to the material conditions, to the labor that produces science, bringing into standpoint theory very strongly notions of how the production of knowledge needs to be a responsible one and needs to also bring in notions of care. So that was Hilary Rose for you. We now come to the work of philosopher Alison Jagger and her book Feminist Politics and Human Nature. She brings in yet another aspect into feminist standpoint theory by bringing in the world of emotions that were often seen as something that is disruptive, or that was often seen as something that is out of the norm and therefore irrational and doesn't really need to be considered. She says, in fact, those are the moments that we need to pay attention to. So let's read out a few passages or lines from what she has to write. She coins the term outlaw emotions. Outlaw emotions are emotions that are conventionally stigmatized because they challenge the dominant values and interests of society. Such emotions may provide the first indications that something is wrong about how things are. I'm sure we've all noticed situations where this one marginalized person or underprivileged person is really kind of, raising their voice to protest and getting emotionally worked up about the injustice that they are perceiving and are subjected to, and yet most everybody kind of has a comment about how this is inappropriate behavior and not quite acceptable. In fact, Jagar says that is the moment to pay attention to. That is the moment that is revealing about what we've all become perhaps numb to, that we have become insensitive to, that we cannot perceive, but that person can. In doing so, she's also questioning the objective doing of science or research, and she writes, the ideal of the dispassionate observer conceals the ways in which dominant social interests shape what is taken to be rational, objective, and true, right? And we'll see how other scholars then develop this perspective. But we also want to see how different groups kind of have made then claims on their particular, or arguing not that it's that their knowledge is a particular knowledge and the rest of the knowledge is universal knowledge, but also using a particular standpoint, arguing that all knowledges are in fact particular and that we need to pay attention to these various particular knowledges. So Patricia Hill Collins, a black feminist scholar, she says that black women's experiences, especially within institutions that are dominated by white men largely, but also white women, have a specific and a much more nuanced perspective of these institutions and the social relations within them. So she writes that black women's experiences as outsiders within, so even though they may be part of these institutions, they are still seen as those that are outside. Black women's experiences as outsiders within white-dominated institutions provide a special standpoint on the self, on family, and society. I mean, this you might kind of also see Du Bois' work kind of reflected over here, of double consciousness, of being aware of the way power is working within society and through social relations, especially when you are at a marginalized position in the hierarchy of how power works. So she writes, those who are marginal to dominant institutions may see patterns that are invisible to those who are fully included in them, because then you just take it as the norm, then you just take it as something that is acceptable and that is how things are. But it's only when you come up against that barrier that I spoke about in my example that I gave, is when you start to see that was something that was not visible to the dominant perspective. She also argues that knowledge and power are inextricably linked, and black feminist thought reflects a struggle to reclaim knowledge as a tool for empowerment. So the whole point, one of the major points of doing feminist research or black feminist research is to reclaim knowledge about themselves and about the social relations that they inhabit in order to empower themselves. Here, much like all of feminist theory and feminist practice and feminist politics, it's not possible to draw the line where politics ends, theory begins, or methodology ends and politics begins. These things are also inextricably linked, and as feminists would argue, this is a good thing. The idea that we usually have of research as objective, of research as kind of unsituated or unbiased is a myth, is a fetish. In fact, good research comes out of being located and identifying and being conscious of one's own location. All of these scholars are writing out of, from their experiences, that stem from being part of the women's movement and the kind of struggles and barriers that they are facing in the process, and being part of the African American movement here, especially in the case of Patricia Hill Collins, also of being part of the Black movement. Again, in all of this, what we are trying to see is how being in a marginalized position is allowing a certain perspective, is allowing a certain view that was not possible when one is in a dominant position. We then come to the work of Donna Haraway, and she coins the term situated knowledges, where she argues that the notion of objectivity is fraught with contradictions, because really no research is truly objective, and in fact good research would know where they are located, and in that sense what would be objective would, especially from a feminist point of view, is something that is situated, that knows its location, that speaks from a particular location, right? And most knowledge seems to have this universalist claim, which she titles as the God trick, the view from nowhere. Somebody somewhere is making claims but not situating themselves, and then claiming that knowledge to be unbiased and universal. That, in fact, she says, is not objective. So the God trick of seeing everything from nowhere is the illusion of infinite vision, a claim that hides its own politics and power. So she is making scientific knowledge aware of the politics that is embedded in their claim to universality. But this is not a one person viewing something from somewhere. These are collectives and communities that are coming together consciously in order to make certain claims. So situated knowledges are about communities, not about isolated individuals. They are about accountability, not relativism. Situated knowledges have also been critiqued for being relativistic. The idea that because you're speaking from somewhere, it's your view is a relativist view and the other view is the universal view. She says that is not accountable research. In order to be accountable, one needs to situate themselves. It has to be situated knowledge. Only then can it be truly objective, and only then can it be accountable. Then we come to the work, lastly, of Sandra Harding. She, in fact, differentiates between strong objectivity and weak objectivity in the same domain, similar domain as what Donna Haraway and the rest of them were also talking about. Sandra Harding says that strong objectivity is knowledge that is, in fact, you can say situated, although she might frame it differently. She writes, strong objectivity requires that the subject of knowledge be placed on the same critical causal plane as the objects of knowledge. It's not just that one is testing for rigor and testing the knowledge claims of the study on a particular object, but also who is making the claim, from where they are making the claim, what are their social experiences, what is their historical and geographical location, are they part of the dominant group, are they marginalized, and how are they marginalized. All of that needs to one needs to be conscious of, and that if one is, then it is strong objectivity. The other notion of a universalist claim, the other notion of speaking from nowhere in particular, or speaking for everyone from everywhere, is in fact weak objectivity. And she also, Sandra Harding also says, following several of the others in standpoint theory, that we must begin our research from women's everyday lives. She writes, starting thought from women's lives provides less partial and less distorted accounts of social reality, because largely social reality and especially its explanations have been constituted through men's worlds, and the rules and the norms and the institutions that we all inhabit were built largely by dominant men of the ruling class. So you wouldn't ask those that have built the structures to reflect upon them themselves. Their view might be quite different. Whereas if you asked women who inhabit a man-made world, literally, to investigate, then their accounts would be less distorted and less partial. because they will speak from experience. They will speak about that barrier that the able-bodied person was not able to see. She also writes, the objectivity of scientific claims depends on the systematic examination of the social values and interests that shape inquiry. I've put in a lot of different ideas out there, but as you see, all of the scholars working on feminist standpoint theory are largely making the claim that we need to situate, we need to locate, we need to speak from somewhere, we need to be conscious as a collective, as a community of the position from which we are doing research, and that sociological research needs to be beginning from the position of those in the margins, specifically women, but also those who are in marginalized positions because of their race, class, caste, and other categories of difference that position them in a marginal position. And that methodologically, theoretically, and politically, we need to work towards the same aim. So with that, we end today's class. I'll see you in tomorrow's class. Thank you.